There is a very specific comfort in dealing with a clean structural problem.
Oh, sure.
Like, if you look at something like civil engineering, say a bridge collapses,
Yeah.
which is, a tragedy, obviously.
Yeah.
But the aftermath it's highly analytical.
Right. It's measurable.
Exactly. The investigators come in, they test the metallurgy of the beams, they check the load calculations, and eventually they can point to one specific sheared bolt or like one miscalculated stress fracture and say, there it is. That is why it failed.
Yeah, because the physical universe usually gives us the luxury of isolated variables. You can isolate the faulty bolt, you replace it, and, well, the system is fixed.
Right. But then, and this is where it gets messy, you transition from physics to something like ecology.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Totally different ballgame.
Completely. You look at a dying coral reef or, say, a sudden algae bloom in a freshwater lake. Suddenly, you can't just point to a sheared bolt.
No, not at all.
You're looking at water temperature. You're looking at agricultural runoff from 100 miles away. Variations in ocean currents, microplastics.
Overfishing.
Exactly. The diagnostic landscape is just incredibly murky. The causes are deeply entangled, and literally nothing is isolated. You can't just fix one thing.
Right. I mean, it's the transition from complicated to complex.
Oh, I like that. Break that down.
Well, a mechanical watch is complicated, right? Lots of pieces, but it's highly predictable. You turn a gear, another gear turns.
Right.
But an ecosystem is complex. The variables interact in ways that constantly change the system itself.
Okay, yes. And the reason we're starting here, sort of hovering between the mechanical watch and the murky ecosystem, is because that is the exact cognitive leap required for what we're unpacking today.
It really is.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. We are exploring the philosophical framework laid out in Chapter 10 of Morals and Dogma. It's a section titled Elu of the 15. And if you've been following the progression of these ideas so far, you are about to experience a profound structural shift in how justice is defined.
Yeah, it's a hard pivot. The text really pulls the rug out from under the reader, and it does so quite unapologetically, I have to say.
It does because, okay, let's recap. In the previous chapter 9, we were basically living in the world of the sheared bolt.
Right, the simple mechanics.
Right. The focus was entirely on personal courage under pressure. The lone individual holding on to their moral compass when the crowd is demanding they compromise.
Which is, it's the classic comforting archetype of the solitary hero.
It's very binary. You either stand firm or you cave.
And we culturally obsess over that lone hero narrative. Just look at, it's the plot of almost every action movie, right? Or epic fantasy.
Oh, absolutely.
It feeds our ego. Because we all secretly want to believe that, in the ultimate crisis, we would be that solitary pillar of virtue, unyielding and perfectly just.
Right, standing against the mob. But Chapter 10 comes along and essentially says, that's cute, but it is entirely insufficient.
Yeah. Nice try, but no.
Exactly. We are taking that clean, isolated definition of personal justice and throwing it into the murky, complex ecosystem of actual human society.
Right, because the core argument of Elu of the 15 is that personal morality, while absolutely foundational, it cannot sustain a functioning world.
It's just not enough.
No. Justice has to transition from a solitary virtue into the sprawling communal responsibility.
And that transition, it requires a fundamental rewiring of how we perceive our own actions.
Right. Absolutely. We are moving from personal moral awareness to collective moral awareness. And what Pike, the author of the text, what he's doing here is not just asking for a change in scale, it's a change in kind.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's break down that distinction between scale and kind, because that feels like the hinge this whole concept swings on.
Yeah, it's crucial. So if it were just a change in scale, the philosophy would simply be, I am a perfectly just person, and my goal is to recruit 5 other people to also be perfectly just, independent people.
Right, like building an army of lone heroes.
Exactly. You're just multiplying the lone hero, but you end up with a room full of statues. They're independent, they're unyielding, but they aren't interacting.
They're just standing there.
Right. But a change in kind means realizing that your individual justice is actually inherently limited.
Limited how?
Well, the text is arguing that you actually cannot be truly just in a vacuum. Your morality only takes on its true dimensions when it intersects with the needs, the rights, and the struggles of the community around you.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like being a virtuoso violinist, playing perfectly in a soundproof room. It doesn't make you a great musician if you're supposed to be playing in a symphony.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if you ignore the tempo of the orchestra, your perfect playing actually ruins the peace.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it, yes.
But hold on. I want to push back on this a little, or at least play devil's advocate.
Sure, go for it.
Because if I keep my head down, I pay my taxes, I don't lie, I don't cheat, and I generally treat the people immediately around me with respect.
The basics.
Right. If I keep my own metaphorical house perfectly clean, doesn't that count? Like, if the rest of the neighborhood is burning down due to systemic issues.
Which they often are.
Right. I might feel bad about it, but I can't be held accountable for the fire. I mean, I swept my porch.
And under the framework of the previous chapter, you would be entirely justified in feeling that way. You preserved your integrity.
Right. So doesn't this shift toward systems and groups give people a massive loophole?
How do you mean?
Well, if justice is a collective systemic problem, then when my own house is a mess, I can just point at the burning neighborhood and say, look, the system is broken, society's failing, you can't blame me for the state of my living room.
Yes.
It feels like it diffuses personal accountability. Like it gives me an out.
It is the most common psychological trap of systems thinking. People use the macro dysfunction to excuse their micro failures.
Exactly.
But the text is actually very careful to close that loophole. It frames collective justice not as a replacement for personal accountability, but as an expansion of it.
An expansion, meaning the entry fee is still a clean house.
The entry fee is an absolute prerequisite. If you are corrupt in your personal dealings, you cannot contribute to collective justice.
You're actively adding fuel to the neighborhood fire.
Precisely. But on the flip side, if you are morally pristine in your personal life and you do absolutely nothing to aid the community, your justice is sterile.
Sterile. Wow.
It produces no fruit. The ELU of the 15 recognizes that retreating to your clean house while ignoring the burning neighborhood is actually a failure of this higher form of justice.
So you can't just be a passive good person.
No.
Yeah.
You are on the hook for your own actions, but you are now simultaneously on the hook for how those actions interact with the broader ecosystem.
Okay, that is heavy. Because to understand that interaction, we really have to look at the mechanics of consequences.
Right, how things actually play out in the real world.
Exactly. The text forces a deep dive into how actions propagate. Now, usually when we talk about this, we use the phrase, the ripple effect. Dropping a stone in a pond.
Right, which is a bit of a tired cliche at this point.
It is, and it implies this gentle, predictable outward movement. Just nice, even circles. But what this philosophy is actually describing feels much more like the butterfly effect in global supply chain logistics.
Oh, I like that framing. It captures the chaos and the interconnectedness much better.
Let's use that. So the text dictates that the student of this philosophy, the ELU, must constantly consider three things: how decisions affect others, how actions influence the future, and how responsibility extends infinitely outward.
Infinitely outward. Keep that in mind.
So if we look at supply chains, say a manager at a shipping port in Shanghai decides to cut back on maintenance for a crane, just to save a localized budget.
Makes sense on their spreadsheet.
Right. But then the crane breaks down. The ship is delayed by 3 days. Because of that delay, a specific component for a medical device doesn't reach a factory in Germany.
And it spirals.
It spirals. The factory halts production. And 6 months later, a hospital in Ohio doesn't get the pediatric ventilators they ordered. Now, the manager in Shanghai didn't intend to affect a child in Ohio.
Of course not.
But the action propagated through the system.
And what Pike is doing here is demanding a terrifying level of moral awareness regarding that propagation. He is introducing the concept of temporal justice.
Temporal justice.
Yeah.
Justice across time.
Yes. We are very accustomed to spatial justice.
Like how my actions affect my neighbor.
Exactly. The person in the same room as me or the person down the street. But temporal justice means we are responsible for the downstream effects of our choices. We are accountable to future outcomes, future generations, people who do not even exist yet.
That completely shatters the illusion of the victimless choice.
Completely.
Because we tell ourselves lies constantly to make navigating life easier.
Yeah.
Oh, my minor dishonesty on this corporate compliance form only affects this one PDF.
Right. It's just paperwork.
Or my decision to cut this environmental corner only affects this quarter's earnings. We isolate our choices.
But the text argues that the ecosystem is entirely interconnected. That minor dishonesty on the compliance form, it subtly shifts the culture of your entire department toward acceptable corruption.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that stress degrades the trust within the team, which affects a coworker, who then carries that unacknowledged anxiety home.
And alters the dynamic with their kids.
Exactly. The action never just stops at the boundary of your immediate intent.
If we really sit with that, I mean, it's paralyzing.
It can be, yeah.
If every single action I take cascades infinitely, how do I ever get out of bed? It's too much pressure.
Well, the goal isn't paralysis by guilt. The goal is profound intentionality. It's about elevating your consciousness so that you no longer operate on autopilot.
Okay, let's test this. For you, listening to this right now, I want you to think about a decision you made recently. Not a massive life overhaul, just a standard operational choice.
Something mundane.
Yeah. Maybe you chose a new vendor at work, or you decided how to handle a conflict at your kid's school, or even just voting for a local zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Trace the cascade just 3 steps out.
Right, so step 1 is the immediate result. You approve the new vendor.
Okay. Step 2. The old vendor loses a major account. How does that affect them? Well, they freeze hiring.
Which leads to step 3. A junior analyst in that town who is banking on that job now has to relocate, uprooting their family.
When you force yourself to map the logistics of your choices like that, you realize how heavy the concept of the ELU of the 15 truly is.
And it perfectly illustrates why the solitary hero from the previous chapter cannot run a society.
Because they're blind to the cascade.
Exactly. A solitary hero makes decisions based entirely on their own internal logic, completely oblivious to the downstream effects. If everyone acts like a solitary hero, oblivious to the cascade, the result isn't a just society.
It's just a collision of independent chaotic forces, just submarines crashing into each other.
Exactly, which means we have to synchronize.
Right. If we're completely responsible for the downstream effects of our actions, we're doomed unless we figure out how to manage those systems together. And that realization naturally brings us to the architecture of shared responsibility.
This is where Pike introduces a very practical mechanics of cooperation. If we're going to manage this complex ecosystem, responsibility has to be shared. It requires mutual accountability.
And it relies on a specific formula, right? The text explicitly states, division weakens justice, while unity strengthens it.
Yes.
I really want to dig into that term, mutual accountability, because this is where the philosophy inverts a very well-known psychological phenomenon, the bystander effect.
Oh, that's a brilliant connection. Yes.
For those who might not be familiar, the bystander effect happens when responsibility is diffused. You know, everyone sees the emergency, say, a car broken down on the highway, but everyone assumes someone else will intervene. So no one does.
Everyone thinks, oh, the guy behind me will call for help.
Exactly. It thrives on anonymity and the assumption that the system will handle it.
But the mutual accountability described in this chapter is the exact opposite of that. It's not a passive safety net where you fall back and hope the group catches you.
Right. It's more like, it's like the tension in a suspension bridge.
The suspension bridge metaphor is incredibly apt here. Let's explore that.
Okay, so every single cable on a suspension bridge is pulling against the others. It's distributing the immense weight of the roadway. If one cable goes slack, it doesn't just fail itself.
It transfers lethal stress to the cables right next to it.
Yes. Mutual accountability means I am holding my tension, but I'm also actively monitoring your tension. If I see you slacking, I have an obligation to pull you up, not just for your sake, but because the whole bridge is at risk.
And let's be honest, that requires a tremendous amount of courage.
It really does.
Because it is incredibly uncomfortable to look a peer in the eye and say, your actions are sending out a cascade that is harming this group. We need to realign.
It's so much easier to just be a bystander, to say, not my circus, not my monkeys.
But the bridge falls if everyone does that.
But here's where the text gets dangerous. But I think we need to really scrutinize this part, because it demands unity. It says division weakens justice. It calls for communication, trust, and alignment of purpose.
It does.
But wait, history is absolutely littered with highly unified groups that had immaculate communication, absolute trust in each other, and a terrifying alignment of purpose.
Right.
And they use that unity to commit horrific atrocities. I mean, mobs are unified, cults are unified, totalitarian regimes are deeply unified.
They are.
So if unity is the metric of success, then the worst actors in human history were highly successful at this.
That is the crucial vulnerability of any collective system. And to his credit, Pike does not ignore it. The text does not equate unity with justice.
Yeah, it doesn't.
No, it states that unity strengthens justice. It is an amplifier.
Okay, an amplifier. Let me make sure I'm getting this. So if you plug a perfectly tuned electric guitar into a massive amplifier, you get beautiful music.
Right.
But if you plug a chainsaw into that same amplifier, you just get deafening noise. The amplifier doesn't care what the input is.
Precisely. The unity is just the power source. This is why the Elu of the 15 binds unity to one ultimate, non-negotiable governor.
Truth.
Yeah.
Truth is the signal going into the amplifier.
Yes. Unity without the relentless pursuit of truth is not justice. It is groupthink. A mob has perfect alignment of purpose, but its purpose is usually fueled by a lie, a prejudice, or just an unexamined emotional reflex.
Right.
Unity guided by the unflinching pursuit of truth is what separates a just society from a totalitarian nightmare. Truth acts as the compass. It ensures the community is actually sailing toward justice rather than just rowing in perfect synchronization off a cliff.
But man, that distinction between a unified community seeking truth and a mob enforcing groupthink, that is a razor-thin line in practice.
It is notoriously difficult to navigate.
Because being in an echo chamber feels remarkably like being in a unified community.
Oh, it feels great.
It feels warm, it feels righteous, everyone agrees with you, so you must be right.
Which brings us to the epistemological crisis at the center of this chapter.
The big question.
Yes, if truth is the compass that prevents our unity from becoming a mob, how do we actually find it?
And here is where Pike demands an almost unbearable level of humility. He argues that the pursuit of truth must be collaborative. And it's based on one devastating premise. No single person possesses the whole truth.
Right. The enlightened individual, the Elu, does not claim absolute certainty, but commits to continuous discovery.
I really want to pause on the psychological weight of that, just for a second.
It's heavy.
To look at your own deeply held beliefs, your carefully constructed moral framework, and actively accept the premise, I do not have the whole picture and I might be fundamentally missing something. That is basically an ego death.
It violates our basic biology.
Exactly. The human brain is an uncertainty reduction machine.
We crave certainty because, historically, certainty meant survival. If I know exactly where the predator is in the brush, I live. If I am uncertain, I die.
So we cling to our absolute truths because they feel biologically safe.
But the text is arguing that in a complex society, clinging to individual certainty is actually what causes the system to collapse.
To visualize how this collaborative truth works, we need to get away from the idea of truth as an object you can just, put in your pocket, like a shiny rock you found.
Right. It's not a static thing.
No, it's more like navigating a submarine through an unmapped underwater trench using sonar.
I love this analogy. Triangulation.
Exactly. So picture this. You are in the submarine, it's pitch black outside. You send out a single sonar ping from your location. The sound wave hits a massive object and bounces back. Based on that one ping, your objective reality is a flat wall.
And you aren't lying. From your vantage point, the data clearly indicates a flat wall.
Right, you have the printout. Look, it's a wall, but if you operate the submarine as if that is the whole truth, you are going to crash.
Because it's incomplete.
Yes.
Right.
The only way to understand the actual 3D shape of the obstacle, to realize it's not a wall but maybe a jagged archway you can navigate through, is to receive pings from multiple different submarines stationed at entirely different angles.
You have to bounce signals off the reality from opposing viewpoints.
Exactly.
The power of that analogy is that it makes opposing viewpoints a mechanical necessity rather than a moral failing.
Right. The submarine on the other side of the trench isn't your enemy. They aren't evil for seeing something different. They are holding the data you need to survive. And if we apply that back to the text, isolating yourself is basically intellectual sabotage. If understanding only grows through collaborative triangulation, then retreating into an ideological echo chamber is literally turning off your sonar receiver.
You just sit in the dark, pinging the same flat wall over and over, feeling incredibly validated because the data keeps confirming your initial bias.
And you look at the people in your echo chamber and say, see? Every time we ping, it's a wall. The universe is a wall.
Anyone who says it's not a wall is crazy.
Exactly. I think about how algorithms govern our modern information intake. Social media, news aggregators, they're mathematically designed to give us back the exact same sonar pings we just sent out.
They systematically isolate us while making us feel like we are part of a massive, unified community.
It's so dangerous. We are being trained to mistake the echo of our own voice for the objective truth of the universe.
Which is why the philosophy of the Elu of the 15 is an act of active rebellion against modern polarization.
It really is.
It demands that you intentionally seek out friction. It requires you to sit across the table from someone whose worldview seems completely alien or even offensive to you and ask, what angle are they pinging from? What piece of the terrain are they seeing that is invisible from my position?
I have to admit, I struggle with this
We all do. It's unnatural.
I remember getting into a massive, heated debate at a dinner party a few years ago. It was about a local housing policy. And I had the data. I had the moral high ground. At least I thought I did.
Right. You had your flat wall ping.
I had my ping. And I was aggressively dismantling this other person's argument, just tearing it apart. And about an hour later, they finally managed to articulate a specific economic vulnerability in their own family that the policy would completely destroy, a vulnerability I had zero lived experience with. And it was like all the air went out of the room. I wasn't entirely wrong about the macroeconomics, but my truth was completely blind to a massive piece of the terrain. I had been operating my submarine based on one ping.
And that realization is exhausting, isn't it?
It's humiliating.
Because it is so much easier to stay in the clean, binary mindset of Chapter 9. I am right, you are wrong, I am the hero, you are the villain.
Exactly.
Wading into the complex reality that you actually need the people you disagree with to see the world clearly, that is a daunting task.
Which brings us to the final, massive logistical hurdle of this chapter. If justice requires this highly unified, mutually accountable community,
Yes.
and finding truth requires this messy, exhausting collaboration of opposing viewpoints, how on earth do you manage that?
It sounds impossible.
How do you keep the submarines from crashing into each other while they argue about the sonar data?
You need a complete paradigm shift in how you define leadership. And this is where the text moves us to the final theme. Leadership reimagined. The guide, not the dictator.
Okay. Pike redefines the leader, not as the person holding the truth, but as the person facilitating the pursuit of it.
Right.
A true leader encourages collaboration, promotes fairness, and leads by building unity, not by relying on raw authority.
It is the difference between an architect and a gardener.
Oh, I like that. Break that down for us.
Well, an authoritarian leader is an architect. They draw the blueprint. They know exactly what the final structure is supposed to look like in their head. The people are just bricks and mortar.
Right. Materials.
The architect's job is to force the materials to conform to the blueprint using authority. Put this brick here because I said so.
Okay, and a gardener.
A gardener doesn't build the plant builds itself.
Oh, that's good.
The gardener's job is to create the environment where growth is inevitable. They manage the soil, they pull the weeds of division, they ensure the sunlight of truth reaches the canopy, they facilitate the ecosystem, they don't dictate it.
That sounds beautiful in a philosophical vacuum. Truly, it does. But I can practically hear the project managers and corporate executives listening to this rolling their eyes.
Because it's slow.
Because facilitation is incredibly slow. Gathering buy-in, encouraging collaboration, letting everyone look at the sonar data, it's terribly inefficient.
It is.
Sometimes the building is literally on fire, and you do not have time to collaboratively pursue the truth of the fire's origins. You need someone with positional authority to yell, "Everyone out the back door right now."
And that is the eternal critique of collaborative leadership. But if you look closely at the language in the text, Pike does not advocate for the abolition of authority.
He doesn't.
No. He says the enlightened leader does not lead by authority alone.
Not by authority alone. That is a critical nuance.
An authoritarian has only one tool. The hammer of compliance. Every problem looks like a nail.
Right.
But the leader, described in the Elu of the 15, understands that while positional authority might be absolutely necessary in an acute, short-term crisis, like a fire, it is a toxic tool for building long-term, sustainable justice.
Because if you rely entirely on authority, you breed dependency.
You breed dependency and you breed resentment. If I force a community to act justly through the threat of punishment, they will comply.
Sure.
But they are only complying because I am watching. The system requires my constant, exhausting, panoptic oversight. The moment I turn my back, or the moment I am removed from power, the entire system collapses back into chaos.
Because the system is fragile, it has a single point of failure, the leader.
Exactly. What the text is advocating for is the creation of a durable system. When a leader transparently seeks the truth alongside the community, when they endure the messy inefficiency of securing genuine buy-in, the community internalizes the
They
values.
own it.
They don't follow the rules because the leader is watching. They follow the rules because they help map the terrain. They own the sonar data.
So the ultimate metric of success for a leader under this philosophy isn't how much control they have while they're in the room. It's what happens to the room when they leave.
A true leader makes themselves obsolete. They empower the community to self-regulate through that mutual accountability we discussed earlier.
The suspension bridge holds itself up.
Exactly. The cables do the work.
This has been a spectacularly dense journey today. We have covered an immense amount of philosophical ground. Let's try to synthesize the arc of this deep dive.
Sure. So we began by shattering a very comfortable illusion. We moved away from the clean, isolated X-ray of personal justice, the lone hero holding the line.
Right, and we recognize that while personal integrity is the entry fee, true justice requires us to wade into the complex ecosystem of the community.
Then we explored the terrifying reality of temporal justice through the supply chain butterfly effect. Every action cascades, affecting people and futures we will never see, forcing us to abandon the myth of the victimless choice.
And because of that cascade, we learned we must manage the system together. We have to build an architecture of shared responsibility, tensioning the suspension bridge through mutual accountability.
Right. And we learned that this unity must be ruthlessly governed by the pursuit of truth, lest we just become an efficient, dangerous mob.
We face the ego-destroying reality that our individual sonar ping is not the whole picture. Finding the truth requires the exhausting, messy work of triangulating with opposing viewpoints and crucially refusing the warm comfort of the echo chamber.
And finally, we saw that guiding this complex process requires a gardener, not an architect, a leader who builds durable, self-sustaining justice through buy-in, rather than fragile compliance through authority.
So as you go back to your day, the text issues a direct challenge to you. How are you interacting with your ecosystem? Are you just keeping your porch clean while ignoring the cascade of your actions?
Are you willing to hold the tension in the bridge, actively holding your peers accountable?
And are you willing to do the hardest work of all? Admitting you do not have the complete picture.
That's the real test.
This is just Chapter 10. The philosophy laid out in Morals and Dogma only gets more rigorous from here. Next time, we will be exploring the sublime elect of the 12, where these concepts of collaborative leadership and service are refined even further.
We'll see what happens when the gardeners of this society have to scale their efforts.
It is a fascinating progression. But before we close today, I want to leave you with one final practical application of the most difficult concept we unpacked.
Let's hear it.
Think about the sonar triangulation.
The need for opposing pings.
Yes, if the text is right, if absolute certainty is an illusion, and we can only map reality by combining diverse perspectives, then the person you vehemently disagree with the most right now, the person whose worldview seems entirely contradictory to yours,
They might be holding the exact sonar ping you need to avoid crashing the submarine.
that is a deeply unsettling and deeply necessary thought.
How does that reality change the way you will approach your next conversation with them?
It changes the entire objective. You aren't entering the conversation to destroy their argument. You are entering the conversation to map the unseen terrain. Thank you for joining us in the muddy waters today. We will see you on the next deep